In Britain's history, especially from the 17th to 19th centuries, the government imposed some of the most bizarre and burdensome taxes you could imagine. These taxes shaped architecture, fashion, and even hygiene, leaving marks still visible today. Our first insane tax is the window tax. Introduced in 1696, it was a property tax based on the number of windows in a house. The logic was that more windows meant a bigger, wealthier home, so the owners could afford to pay more. But the effect was far from what the government intended. Many people bricked up their windows to avoid the tax, leading to dark, poorly ventilated homes that affected the health of those living inside. The tax was finally abolished in 1851, and you can still find buildings in the UK today with bricked up windows, a lasting reminder of this tax. Next up, we have the beer tax. Though Tsar Peter the Great is more famously associated with the beer tax in Russia, Henry VIII of England allegedly imposed a similar tax. It said that the men had to pay a fee if they wanted to keep their beards, especially as facial hair became fashionable. The fire tax was introduced in 1662 as a tax on fireplaces. Each fireplace in a home counted towards the tax. So the more fireplaces you had, the more you paid. Like the window tax, it hit poorer households harder. People went as far as sealing up their fireplaces to avoid paying. And in cold English winters, this was no small sacrifice. For many, the tax was oppressive, and it was eventually repealed in 1689. In 1712, Britain introduced a tax on soap, considering it a luxury item. While wealthier households could still afford it, the tax made soap even less accessible to the working class, for whom it was already an expensive necessity. This led to widespread hygiene challenges, especially among poorer communities, contributing to deteriorating public health and sanitation. The tax remained in effect for over a century, only being repealed in 1835 after significant public outcry. In 1784, Great Britain placed a tax on hats. To wear a hat you needed to pay, and hat sellers needed a license to operate. This was an attempt to tax luxury items worn by wealthier people, but it led to some inventive loopholes. People began designing headgear that didn't technically qualify as a hat to avoid the tax. Despite the creativity, the tax was deeply unpopular and lasted only until 1811. Another strange tax was the wallpaper tax, introduced in 1712. This tax applied to patterned wallpaper, making decorative interiors more expensive. Wealthier households that could afford wallpaper ended up hiring artists to hand paint designs directly on walls to avoid the tax. The wallpaper tax was abolished in 1836. Finally, we have the candle tax. In 1709, Britain taxed candles, making it harder for poorer families to afford lighting. People tried to stretch their candles as much as possible or resorted to unsafe alternatives like rushlights. The candle tax remained until 1831, long enough to burn down quite a few houses among those who couldn't afford taxed candles.